In this video, I'm going to be talking about safe tool handling and sharpening. First, a heads up. You may have noticed that this is quite a long video, so I suggest you watch it in two sections. Section 1, tool handling, and Section 2, sharpening. I will be talking a lot in this video about safety. Before I start, I just want to make a general note on safe carving. Most accidents happen if you're tired or stressed. So, if at any point you're feeling tense and frustrated, I suggest you stop. Also, it might sound odd, but keeping your tools as sharp as possible is safer than using blunt tools. You're more likely to slip and cut yourself if you're using a blunt tool. For Section 1, Safe Tool Handling, I'll be going through the different tool holds that I use and showing how to do them safely. I will show you examples of them in action as well. If it feels like too much to remember, I will be recapping all the tool holds as we go through the tutorials. Let's look at the whittling knife first. There are two knife holds that I use in these tutorials. Number 1, the Whittling Hold. When using the Whittling Hold, use your index finger as an anchor and brace the back of the blade with your thumb. For example, here I am carving the bird's body using the Whittling Hold. Here's a safety tip. When using the Whittling Hold, make sure that the piece feels stable. For example, you can brace the piece against your body. This should give you more stability for safer carving. Hold the piece in a way that feels natural to you. You won't really see me doing this in the video because for clarity I'm just showing my hands. But you can hold the piece against your body if you want to. Knife hold number 2, the scoring hold. Here, I am scoring in the wing feathers, using the scoring hold. As the name suggests, I mainly use the scoring hold for scoring in lines. It's a bit like holding a pencil. Here are a couple of safety tips. Don't put too much pressure on the blade, in case it slips. And always keep your spare hand away from the direction of scoring. Very occasionally, I will use the scoring hold for carving rather than scoring. For example, here I'm carving in the swallow's facial features, using the scoring hold. Now let's look at the palm gouge. There are 3 gouge holds in these tutorials, though the first 2 are the main ones. Number 1, the thumb hold. For the thumb hold, grip the handle in a clenched fist and place your thumb over the heel of the handle. Your thumb acts as a lever on the heel of the handle as you're carving. You can use the thumb hold for one-handed carving. For example, here I am carving a bird's wing using the one-handed thumb hold. I am holding the piece with my spare hand and directing it towards the bench stop. Safety tip. Always keep your spare hand behind the blade and behind the direction of carving. You can also use the thumb hold for two-handed carving. Place your thumb under the blade and place 2 fingers on top. Or you can run the blade between 2 fingers with your thumb underneath the blade. Using your other hand will give you extra control and support. You will need to clamp the piece in place when using a two-handed chisel hold. You can also clamp the bench hook to your table if you want to. Here are some safety tips. Make sure the piece feels secure before carving. And when carving, always exert force towards the bench stop. Here, I am using the two-handed thumb hold to carve the underside of the wings. Gouge hold number 2, the index hold. Hold the chisel in your palm so that your index finger is resting on top of the blade. I nearly always use the index hold for two-handed carving. Place your thumb under the blade and rest 2 fingers on top. Or you can run the blade between 2 fingers, with your thumb still underneath. Here I am using the index hold to carve the top side of the wings. Safety tip: always clamp your piece in place for two-handed carving. Very occasionally, I will use a sideways index hold. This is one-handed. For example, here I am using the sideways index hold to clean up the edges of the feathers. Gouge hold number 3, the pencil hold. Hold the chisel like a pencil, halfway down the shaft. Here I am using the pencil hold to carve the swallow face. Safety tip: whenever you're carving, never try and remove too much wood at once. Now I'm going to move on to the second section of this video: how to sharpen your tools. I'm going to cover 5 topics in this section: how to strop your knife, how to strop your gouge using a slip strop, how to make your own slip strop if you don't have one. I'll talk a little bit about sharpening stones, and I'll finish with some tips on how to look after your tools. Number 1, stropping your knife. To keep your knife sharp whilst carving, strop both sides of the blade every 20 minutes. Start by dressing the strop with compound. Then, place your knife on the strop and drag it down the length of the strop as shown. Repeat this stroke about 20 times. That's 1 stroke for every 1 minute of carving. Here's an important tip. When stropping, the bevel of the blade must be flush with the surface of the strop. There shouldn't be a gap between the edge of the blade and the surface of the strop. After stropping, the surface of your strop may look shiny. This is where tiny particles of metal have rubbed off onto the surface. Now strop the other edge of the knife. You can redress the strop or flip it around. Again, repeat the stroke about 20 times. My strop is double-sided, so to finish, I strop my knife using the undress side as well. This adds an extra level of polish to the blade. Number 2. Stropping your gouge with a slip strop. I will demonstrate with the flex cut slip strop. And first, I will use this profile to sharpen the inside of my gouge. Start by dressing it with compound. Next, place your gouge blade on the surface of the strop so that it is flush with the curve of the strop. Then tilt it upwards very slightly. Drag the gouge down the length of the strop. Repeat the stroke about 20 times. That's 20 strokes for every 20 minutes of carving. After stropping, the surface will look shiny. Again, that's tiny particles of metal rubbing off on the surface. Now I will sharpen the outside edge of my gouge. This profile is designed for sharpening the outside edge of a gouge, but it's for a deeper and narrower gouge. So instead, I will use this flat area here. Once again, dress it with compound first. Drag the gouge down the length of the strop, repeating the stroke about 20 times. Here are some pointers on stroke technique. Tip 1. Keep the bevel flush with the strop. Your gouge will have a beveled edge. When you're stropping the outside edge of the gouge, the bevel must be flush with the surface of the strop and not tilted too far in either direction. There is actually a diagram in the slip strop instructions. Tip 2. Gently rock the strokes. As you're stropping, gently rock the bevel of the gouge along its curve. With those 2 tips in mind, here's another demo. Again, the surface of the strop will be metallic after stropping. Number 3. Making a slip strop with your offcuts. In your carving kit, you will have an offcut like this one. You can convert this into a slip strop by carving the ends into the inside and outside profiles. Clamp the piece in place. And use the index hold to carve with the beveled edge of your gouge. Then, flip your chisel over and use the thumb hold to carve the inside shape of your gouge. If this feels a little tricky, try knocking off the corners first. To use the slip strop, Apply 2 blobs of Autosol metal polish. Then rub the gouge backwards and forwards. First on the outside edge, and then on the inside edge. Keep polishing until the whole area has turned grey. That's the metallic particles rubbing off. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about sharpening stones and whether we need them. As I mentioned in video 2, flex cut tools are made of very thin steel and are designed to be kept sharp just by stropping. So, if in doubt, you can just stick with stropping, but make sure you do it regularly. But I will very occasionally use sharpening stones just to refresh the edges of my tools slightly. So I thought I'd give you some background info on sharpening stones. There are different types of sharpening stone. These are diamond stones. They're great for sharpening larger, more traditional carving tools made from thicker steel. This is a very fine grit water stone, which is more suitable for sharpening flex cut tools. This stone is itemised on the kit list. It just needs dressing with water. I use the same stroke techniques as stropping, but I only repeat the stroke about 6 times for each side of the blade. And again, I only use this very minimally. I also use the water stone for the beveled edge of my gouge. Again, I only repeat the stroke about 6 times. And I only do this very occasionally. These are very fine grit slip stones, which I use from time to time to refresh the inside edge of gouges and V-tools. There is a larger slip stone for sharpening the inside edge of larger gouges, and a smaller slip stone for small tools. Both of these are itemised on the kit list. I dress the slipstones with WD-40. And I use the same stroke technique as I did for slip stropping. But again, I'll only repeat the stroke about 6 times. If you are going to use sharpening stones with flex cut tools, use them very minimally. Otherwise you can over sharpen and damage the blade edge. We're near the end of the video now. I'm just going to finish with some quick tips on knife and chisel care. Do store your tools in an oily cloth to keep them from rusting. Do strop your tools every 20 minutes. That's 20 strokes for every 20 minutes of carving. Avoid using metal clamps or vices. If your tool hits into metal, it'll dent the carving edge. Avoid sanding, then returning to carving. The grit from the sandpaper will lodge in the surface of your piece and then dent the carving edge of your tools. Leave all sanding till after you've finished carving, if possible. Or you can remove particles of sandpaper with a coarse brush, like a toothbrush. This concludes safe tool handling and sharpening.